Hey everybody, it's GM Lee with a new video, and it's a topic I've received so many requests for. The chase rules, using the core rules book for Savage Worlds Adventure Edition, or SWADE for short. We've all seen those epic movie chases, screeching tires, desperate leaps across rooftops, even some spaceship dogfights thrown in for good measure. Savage Worlds lets you recreate all of that action at your tabletop. From high seas battles with cannons blazing to daring escapes through bustling city streets, these rules have you covered. Get ready to put the pedal to the metal and enjoy a high-octane rush. It's chase time. Forget passive rules and basic tables that most game systems offer for vehicle rules. Savage Worlds chases are all about your choices and creativity, where everyone gets in on the action. Whether you're the driver weaving through traffic, the sharpshooter blasting from the back seat, or the grease monkey juicing the engine while bullets fly, your decisions shape the chase. It's a strategic dance where quick thinking and clever maneuvers can turn the tide. This video dives into the core rules and gets you started with a classic two-car chase. But the fun won't stop there. In another Part 2 video, we'll explore how chases play out in different settings, from heart-pounding aerial dogfights to rooftop parkour escapes. Vehicle rules, regardless of system, usually define two key areas. First are what skills are used to determine how you handle the vehicle. With Savage Worlds, a character will often need to make a maneuvering roll, which is a skill appropriate to the method of travel. Need to weave through a crowded marketplace on foot? That's an athletics check. Dodging laser blasts in a spaceship dogfight? Time for a piloting roll. The action you're taking determines the skill you use, and every roll is a chance to pull off an epic maneuver. Imagine slingshotting around a corner on your motorcycle with a daring driving check, leaving your pursuers in the dust with a clutch riding roll, or using boating to catch the wind in your sails and avoid a broadside of cannons by mere feet. The maneuvering roll is made to determine success or failure of any action that is chase-specific, and the results of either should always be impressive. Now, one thing that bogs down chases in other games? Speed charts, turn radiuses, and endless calculations. Well, you can forget that. In Savage Worlds, we keep things fast and furious. You, the GM, set the scene. For most vehicles, while there are differences in overall speed, for the purposes of a chase, consider the vehicles relative to each other. The GM does decide who can participate in a chase. Savage Worlds trusts your common sense to make the chase exciting. Focus on the story and focus on having fun. A player on the run might be able to evade enemies in a car if the streets are very congested, but could be in a lot of trouble being chased by a plane in an open field. Now that we've figured out speed and how a vehicle works with a skill roll, let's look at exactly how you manage a chase. For that, we'll use a deck of regular cards to help us keep track of position during a chase. This is an extra deck in addition to the one used for action cards. Characters or vehicles will move on the battle map from one card position to another. For all my video examples, I use the Foundry Virtual Tabletop and the same gaming environment I use for my Savage Worlds campaigns. Grab your chase deck and shuffle the cards well. You can deal out as many cards as you feel comfortable with, but the core rules recommend using 9. Don't worry, you can adjust the number later. Next, we'll need to lay out the cards. We'll explore different layouts in our next video, but for now, let's keep it simple. Since it's a card chase, and our first example, we'll arrange the cards in a straight line. In a chase, characters often need to interact with the other vehicles involved. And usually that means weapons. Sure, speed is important, but how far you can shoot matters too. To keep things exciting, SWADE has suggested range increments on typical weapons that could be involved. so they'll have a range of at least a couple of increments. The type of chase you're running depends on the range increments used, measured in game inches. Remember, it's not about how fast someone normally goes, but the chase category that sets the pace. This simplifies things. No need to worry about calculating exact speeds and distances. Just focus on everyone having fun. The actual range increment numbers are only suggestions and are based on most typical weapons used in those encounters. You want most weapons to be able to fire a couple of range increments over. Depending on the vehicles or weapons involved, you can lower or raise the increment ranges. For instance, a tank may move slower than most average cars, but the cannon attached to it can fire a heck of a long way. Just like any other encounter, figuring out whose turn it is matters in a chase. Here's how it works. At the beginning of each chase round, you draw action cards as usual for initiative. For chases on foot, bicycles, or horseback, each character gets their own action card to determine their turn order. For chases involving vehicles or wagons, everyone inside counts as a single group, so they draw one action card. But everyone in the vehicle can act individually during that turn. In a group, one person will be responsible for handling the vehicle, while the other individuals within each group can take action whenever they want during the round for maximum effect. They can support each other, test opponents, attack, or do anything that might normally be done within their turn. There are a number of actions that are specific to a chase, and we'll look at those in detail during our example. Just like any good chase, there's always unexpected problems. These are called complications and are determined by the action card you draw. Clubs mean trouble. If you draw a club, it's a complication. With a car chase, for example, this could be anything from a breakdown to a sudden roadblock. The seriousness of the complication is then determined by the suit of the chase card you were on at the time, and the complication is taken care of at the start of a turn before other actions are taken. To overcome it, the individual character or the group's driver involved needs to make a quick maneuvering roll with the appropriate modifiers. There's no action cost for this, and it adds an exciting layer of chaos to your chases, keeping everyone on their toes. There's more to explain with special maneuvers used in a chase, but let's do that with an actual example. Our first chase is fairly straightforward, and we'll deal the cards out in a row. If you're in Foundry, it's very easy. Just right-click on the action card deck, choose how many cards you want, and then select them as objects. Then arrange them on your map. Since it's a card chase, we'll use 5-inch range increments on the virtual grid. More complex chases like dogfights need larger distances, but that's for our next video. All right, adventurers, let's buckle up. I run a thrilling 1930s pulp campaign, and hopefully you've already met our intrepid heroes, Blake, Sarah, and Jack, from my previous videos. They're hot on the trail of some nefarious cultists that have snatched a briefcase containing transcripts that provide clues to a mysterious artifact of immense power. This will be a simple 2-car chase. The cultists, clutching the briefcase, act as a group in the leftmost car. Our heroes, determined to reclaim those transcripts, are hot on their heels. Let's jump into this chase and see how the rules unfold. First, we need to decide on who the vehicle operator is. Blake and Sarah both have a D6 in driving, but Blake purchased Ace, an edge that eliminates 2 levels of penalties on maneuvering rolls with his last advancement. The players agree that Blake makes the best sense behind the wheel and responsible for the car's performance. The other players will still be able to act during each round. I moved the cars up 1 card to get some momentum going. For the first round, we draw a 10 of hearts for the players and a 9 of hearts for the cultists. The players get to go first, and the decisions on what to do at first are easy. Blake is driving, Jack is going to try and shoot at a tire, and that leaves Sarah. She's going to try and support the driver. Jack goes first and subtracts 4 from his roll. -2 for shooting from a moving vehicle, and -2 because it's a called shot against the tire, which is considered a small target on the Savage Worlds scale chart. Unfortunately, he misses. Sarah goes next, and the player gets creative with her support roll. She decides she's going to look out for obstacles on the road. That's a notice roll, which Sarah makes. Leaning out her side of the car, she sees a garbage can on the road and shouts a warning to avoid it. Blake now has a +1 to his driving roll from Sarah's support roll. But just what does Blake plan to do with it? There are a number of chase-specific actions a character or characters can take. Change position and evade are either free actions or limited actions, while board, flee, force, hold steady, and ram are all actions. We'll look at most of these during this chase. Blake decides that for the group to really be effective against the bad guys, they at least need to be on the same chase card. He chooses to change position as an action, not a free action. So what is it, and what's the difference? You can change your position on the battle map by making your maneuvering roll as a free action. Success allows a character to move 1 chase card, or up to 2 cards with a raise. That can be forward or back, up or down, or a combination of the two depending on how the cards are laid out on your map. If you change position as an action, you add +2 to your maneuvering roll. Either way, change position can only be used once per turn. If the chase is simply linear, a character can hit the brakes without making a maneuvering roll and drop back 1 or 2 chase cards. No roll is needed, but this still counts as the single use of change position in that turn. One last thing. The fastest one on the map, whether it's an individual or vehicle with a top speed that's faster than any opponent, gets to add +1 to the change maneuvering roll. Or +2 if twice as fast. Here, taken as an action, Blake adds +2 to his driving roll, with an additional +1 from Sarah's support. The roll is made without a raise, and their vehicle pulls up alongside their opponent's. It's now the cultist's turn. Trying to move ahead, the bad guys choose to change position, but only as a free action. There's no bonus, but the cultists can take an action. They fail their driving roll, so there's no movement. Now, taking a look at the map, the GM decides to use force as their action and try to push the player's car into the path of an oncoming vehicle on the other side of the road. So, what's force? Force is an action where you try and push an opponent or their vehicle physically away from you, even possibly into an obstacle. To use force as an action, you must both be on the same chase card and then make opposed maneuvering rolls. If the attacker wins, the opponent is bumped. A raise acts as if the defender rolled a critical failure on a maneuvering roll, and we're going to look at that one later. While they failed their original maneuvering roll, the cultists' dice explode for 10 on their driving skill for the force action. Blake isn't quite so lucky and rolls lower, therefore he's failed the opposing roll, and their car is bumped. During a chase, being bumped can be the result of a few things, including from a force. The one who caused the bump can move their opponent 1 chase card in any direction, and they can do this at any time during their turn, so if other actions, like attacks, need to be taken care of first, they can be. Since the cultists succeeded, our heroes are bumped. We're at the start of a linear chase, so the GM decides to move them back one action card. But let's go for dramatic effect and describe it this way. Attempting to pull up alongside the car, the cultists suddenly swerve, crashing the side of their car into yours. You're forced into the path of an oncoming vehicle. Slamming on the brakes saves your car but puts you behind the cultists once again. And this for me is what makes chases so exciting, because the results are unpredictable and you're also dealing with the environment around you. The opportunities to be creative and improvise in the situation are both dramatic and loads of fun. Not just for the GM, but for the players alike. And in this case, the player decides to go along with the circumstances and one-up the GM. The player describes it thusly. When Blake slams on the brakes, he turns the wheel sharply and pulls a bootlegger reverse, shifting the car into reverse. The players are still chasing the cultists, but now the car is backwards. For some game masters, driving the car in reverse might draw a penalty with future rolls, but not for me. For one thing, this is a pulp campaign, so chasing the bad guys in reverse is actually perfect for the setting. Secondly, anytime a player does something dramatic, fun, and exciting in Savage Worlds, they should be rewarded. So here, the GM awards Blake a Benny. On to the next turn, and initiative cards are drawn again. This time, the cultists go first. Their main goal is to get away, and they don't like getting shot at either. The GM decides to change position as a free action, and then use evade as an action. Evade is when you move or drive erratically, even using available cover or your surroundings to maximize your potential cover. If taken as a free action, all attacks against the character, the vehicle, or anyone in it take a -2 penalty until the start of the next turn. By the same token, the character and everyone else in the vehicle also take the penalty to their attacks as well. If evade is done as an action, the penalty increases to -4 for everyone. The cultists roll their driving trait and succeed, successfully changing position by one card as a free action, and with evade as an action, they'll be taking a -4 penalty to any attacks against them. Now with a 4 of spades, it's the player's turn. They know they need to catch up and counter the evasive maneuvering. Blake decides to hold steady as a free action. They'll risk the bonus to any attacks against them. And change position as an action, adding +2 to his driving roll, which he makes with a raise. That means moving 2 chase cards, so they successfully pull right back up to the cultists. And with hold steady, everyone is able to ignore the -2 penalty you would normally take from running or being on an unstable platform like the car. And good thing too, because Jack is going to try something incredibly daring. This is pulp after all, and jump from the back of their car to the cultist car. They need to get that briefcase. Now, this isn't boarding. That is a whole different type of action we'll look at in our next video. Sarah decides it's time to get creative too. If Jack goes to jump hard enough with the cultist evading, she wants to help, so she takes off her scarf, gives one end to Jack, and braces herself in the seat. Hopefully this will steady Jack and support his roll to jump. The GM decides that's an athletics roll, which Sarah makes, so that'll add a +1 for Jack. Plus, the hold steady bonus cancels out unstable platform, so his athletic roll will still, though, be at a -3 total because the cultists took the evade action. Luckily, the dice explode, but with the penalties, he still only just makes it with a 4. Jack makes the jump and finds himself in the other car. Next round. With a 10 of spades, the players go first. With Jack in the other car, Blake decides to hold his action and see what the cultists do with their vehicle. Meanwhile, though, Jack can still act in the turn. He tries to wrestle the briefcase away from the cultist's hands with a strength versus strength roll, He gets a 5 and holds his breath, but the cultist only rolls a 4. Jack has control of the briefcase, but the cultist can still try and get it back later on in this turn. Now what? Sarah decides to hold her turn along with Blake to see what happens. Now it's the cultist's turn. The driver tries to get ahead of the players again, but chooses not to evade because somehow they've got to get that briefcase back. The GM decides to use change position as an action with a +2 and succeeds, allowing the card to pull ahead by 1 card. Before anything else can happen, the players use their held actions. Blake takes change position again as an action and gets a raise, but he needs to stay beside the car. Jack has to get back after all. So even though he can move 2 chase cards, Blake chooses to only move 1, but does so in a creative fashion. The player tells the GM he'd like to pull ahead, then pull another bootlegger reverse so that once again the car is facing forwards and alongside the cultists. I'd easily allow that because the players are having a lot of fun, and isn't that the point here? Sarah, meantime, has held her action and wants to test the cultist fighting with Jack so that she can make sure he doesn't get the briefcase back. She pulls a scalpel out of her doctor's bag, not because she thinks it'll actually hurt anyone. She just wants to get the cultist off balance. She throws it, and miraculously, the dice explode. Her athletics roll succeeds, and she chooses vulnerable. So Jack will have an advantage of +2 on his strength roll if the cultist decides to take the briefcase back. To finish off the round, it's finally the last cultist's turn, and he tries to get the briefcase back. It's strength versus strength again, but this time Jack has a +2 advantage and just barely holds on. With that, the round is over. Action cards are drawn for the next round, and the players get to go first. Before anything else can happen, Jack has to get back to his car. He tries his athletic roll at -2 for unstable platform and fails, but spends a Benny to try again, and this time the dice explode and he succeeds. Jack leaps back into the back seat of their car. They've got what they came for, so now it's time to get away. Blake decides to hold steady as a free action and force as his action. Blake wants to drive the cultists off the road. That leaves Sarah, and she decides to support Blake. Sarah pulls a small mirror from her purse and attempts to reflect sunlight so it will shine in the eyes of the cultist driving. This is a test, and Sarah is aiming to distract the cultist. The skill roll for this isn't as obvious, but the GM decides to stick with athletics as the roll, reflecting, pun intended, Sarah trying to position the mirror just right. The GM loves the ingenuity of this action and gives Sarah a Benny. Hold steady eliminates the penalty from unstable platform, and she makes the roll as the dice explode. The opposing driver uses spirit to oppose the roll. Why spirit? Well, it's really up to the GM what ability roll is used, and in this case, the GM reasons that being able to dodge or angle your head away is hard being behind the wheel. Instead, it's about how determined and focused the driver can be to ignore the light, hence a spirit roll, which the driver fails and is now distracted, subtracting 2 from all trait rolls until the end of his next turn. But that's more than enough time for Blake to make his force roll. His driving roll explodes for a total of 11 and is compared to that of the cultist driver. Even before applying the -2 from being distracted, the driver only rolls a 2. Blake not only wins the roll, but he does so with a raise. A raise is treated as if the defender rolled a critical failure on a maneuvering roll. While making your maneuvering roll, should you ever roll a critical failure, you have to roll on the out of control table, with the results as shown. Since Blake won the force roll with a raise, the effect is exactly the same, and the cultist has to roll here. Remember, the one who caused the bump can move their opponent one chase card in any direction, so Blake chooses to move them back one chase card. Plus, now the cultists have to roll on the out of control table, and with a 2d6 they roll a 5, and the result is distracted. Ground vehicles spin out or skid, and everyone on board is distracted until the end of their next turn. Blake gets his wish. The cultist car is off the side of the road and up on the sidewalk. Action cards are drawn for the next round, and the cultists get to go first, but they drew the ace of clubs. And drawing a club as your action card means it's a complication. As we explained earlier in the video, a complication is when something bad happens during a chase. With a car chase, for example, this could be anything from a breakdown to a sudden roadblock. The character driver or pilot must make a maneuvering roll as a free action to deal with the complication. The suit on his current chase card determines any modifier to the maneuvering roll and the results a failure. With spades, it's a critical failure on a maneuvering roll, thus you roll on the out of control table. If the chase card is a heart, then the character or vehicle is simply bumped. Diamonds has the same result, except the maneuvering roll is at a -2. If the chase card is a club, the maneuvering roll is at a -2, and if failed, it's treated as a critical failure. Thus, you roll on the out of control table. Finally, with a joker, yes, you can keep jokers in the chase card deck as well. The character or vehicle can be bumped up to 2 chase cards, but you actually get a +2 to your maneuvering roll. Let's see how this plays out for the cultists. The chase card is a 7 of diamonds, but the car was already just bumped. The GM decides to make it more interesting and treat it like spades, so that means it's another roll on the out of control table, but with no penalty to the maneuvering roll. The cultist fails his driving roll, so then he rolls 2d6 for the out of control table and gets a 12. Uh-oh. That means the result is a glitch, and that means a roll on the critical hits table. A glitch is defined as something coming loose or breaking from rough handling, and the vehicle suffers a critical hit, but you re-roll any results with crew. Critical hits are normally part of a vehicle suffering direct damage from attacks. Vehicles have a toughness rating, can suffer wounds, and with enough wounds end up wrecked. And that's something we'll focus on in our next video for part 2 of the chase rolls. The cultists roll on the critical hits table and roll another 12. That's bad luck for the cultists, not that they deserve any other kind. And the GM decides that their car has stalled completely. Seeing the trouble that they're having, the players can't help but be happy and laugh at their misfortune. Jokingly, Sarah yells out, "Gun it!" But all kidding aside, the GM thinks maybe that could be a great support roll. He asks Sarah if she'd like to roll persuasion to encourage Blake. She does, and it's a success. Blake now gets to add +1 to his maneuvering roll as he shoves the pedal down to the floorboard. Blake takes change position as a limited action, adding +2 to his roll for a total of +3. He succeeds with a raise and thus gets to move 2 chase cards. Initiative is drawn for the next round and the cultists go first. The GM decided that the engine had stalled, maybe even flooded. Thus, a maneuvering roll is needed to get the engine going again. A roll the cultists fail. Next, it's the player's turn, and Blake decides, why mess with a good thing? He once again rolls to change position as a limited action, and this time the dice explode. Just like last time with a raise, they get to move 2 chase cards. It's the next round now, and this time the players go first. The decision is easy. Ahead of the cultists by 4 cards, the players decide that Blake will take flee as the action. A character or vehicle may try and escape the chase completely if there are at least 4 chase cards between himself and the closest foe. If so, he makes a maneuvering roll at -4 and escapes if successful. The penalty is reduced to -2 if there are at least 5 cards, and 0 if there are 6 or more cards between them. Blake has his ace edge, so the -4 penalty is reduced to -2. Blake succeeds, and the players get away, triumphant over the cultists and in control of the briefcase. The players whoop and holler at the table with loud congratulations. That is until the GM reveals that the briefcase, when they open it, is actually empty. But that's a tale for another adventure. That finishes up our look at the basic chase rules for Savage Worlds Adventure Edition. I hope you liked the video and found it helpful, but there's a lot more to explore with chase rules that are specific to different adventure settings, and looking at combat between vehicles as well. We're going to explore all of that in great detail in our next video, Chase Rules Part 2. To make sure you don't miss the next video or future videos, please subscribe and hit the bell in the top right corner. Thanks so much for watching.